Welcome and hello. This is a tutorial video on HEC ResSim, and in this lesson I'm going to be talking about function of release rules. These are release rules and they are functions of independent variables. This is part 2 of the video on the topic. I just made part 1, but there's enough to talk about to fill another video. So here we are. Here's our reservoir network on the screen. So I'm going to go right click and edit. Not going to really talk about the what's already happened here. We have our reservoir with a controlled outlet. We click the operations tab. We've got zone A, B, a flood zone, an active zone, and we already have one rule defined here. So we're going to go ahead and add another rule by right click, add new rule, and then I'm going to go ahead and type in a generic name for now until I have a better name for it. I'm going to put in right. It's going to operate the controlled outlet, and it is a release function, which is the first function rule type selected. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. That gives me a new rule. It's second on the priority list here under zone A. Next, we have to say what is this rule a function of? What's the independent variable? We click define, and that brings up a dialog box for our independent variable definition. What we saw from the previous video is that date and date time are pretty straightforward and simple. There's no extra data required here. It just gives us a table to fill out the date or date and time. But the other options I want to talk about in this video are the model variable, external variable, and state variable. If we select a model variable or state variable, then what we see here is a table of independent variables within the reservoir network, and it's up to us to select one of these variables and then click the select button, and that would assign that variable to become our independent variable to later be used in the rule and then used as part of a minimum or maximum or specified flow rate for the release. Up at the top, there are filters. So what you're seeing here in the table is time series, element type, and variable. And if we knew exactly what element type, say it's the reservoir, it filters out and only shows us the reservoir variable types. If we know we want to deal with flow, then it only shows us the flow. So obviously that's how filters work. But if you had not too important for such a simple network, but if you had hundreds and thousands of potential independent variables, these filters could really be helpful and save you time. I'm going to select reservoir storage. So storage, and there's my one and only storage variable. It's the storage in reservoir one pool. So once I've made this selection, click the select button down here, and then the selected independent variable appears here and ready to go. So I'm going to click OK, but I'm going to return here in just a moment. So we see the function of name is defined and ready to go. I'm going to return to the define button and click that. And now we have to discuss the time series options. So again, our independent variable here is the storage in the reservoir, and that is based on the previous value. Now there's 6 different time series options listed in this dropdown, and the time series options are only for your model variable, external variable, or state variable. Model variable. Thanks. All right, so the current value is pretty straightforward. It's the current storage in the reservoir as I've selected it. The previous value represents the last calculated value, or in this case, the last storage in the reservoir that's calculated from the previous time step, which oftentimes is the first value of the current time step. The offset value is a little tricky. What you have to do now for offset is specify the offset in hours in this text box right down here, where positive numbers like 1 or 2 or 3 represent hours in the future, and then -1 or -2 or -3 or however many hours represent time in the past. Also, the user manual mentions that this value from the time series, that is a certain number of hours back from the current time period. So as I understand that if the time period is 1 hour, then -1 would represent the beginning of the current time period. -2 would be the beginning of the previous time period. And I guess 0 would be the last calculated value of the current time period. And again, 1 would be in the future and so on. Okay, so the last few options are all kind of the same: period average, period maximum, and period minimum. If you select any of these values, you're expected to type in an offset and a period in hours. So the period is the duration. That's always going to be a positive number. And then the offset is going to be just like I explained for the offset value. It's going to be based on either positive or negative. So the example in the appendix for this says that if you want a 6-hour average computed from the time series data offset 3 hours back from the current time step, you'd select period average. We got that here. And then enter -3 for the offset and 6 for the period. So we'd go -3 there and 6 for the period. And what that would look like is we're looking for the average storage in the reservoir between 9 hours back and 3 hours back, representing a 6-hour uh, duration that average is being taken over. All right, so that's great. Let's go ahead and just click previous value because that's a little bit more common and realistic. And now we have our table of values. One last thing I wanted to point out is this external variable. If we select external variable, what you're going to do is type in a variable name. You're just creating a variable right here. And it needs to be a distinct variable name that's unique enough for you to remember exactly what it is. And that name is going to later be identified in the alternative editor in the time series tab for us to define the time series that's associated with that variable name. So I'm not going to say any more about that right here. We will talk about that when we get to the alternative editor. All right, where were we? Boom and boom. Okay, great. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is the seasonal variation, which is this checkbox down here. The seasonal variation refers to a variation across the 12 months of the year. Let me go ahead and open up the editor. And what you see is a single date starting with January 1. And what we want to do here is type in dates that will serve as like new checkpoints in the rule. So no longer is the release rule based on storage only, but that release rule is also going to be based on the time of year. I'm copying some numbers from Excel. I'm just going to select the first row and Control V and click OK. And now what our table looks like is this. So now we have months across the top for release, 5 different dates I just made up, as well as storage. So when we type in those months, they need to be in order. So like January 1st, and then after that, just later dates throughout the year. And then same with storage. When we enter the numbers, they need to be increasing. I'm going to go ahead and right click paste from Excel. And that didn't seem to work. Did earlier. Okay, whatever. So I Control V'd and that pasted in just fine. And this is just some dummy data. We have a plot over on the right that shows the what I'm calling minimum release. This is a linear interpolation, and I'm actually going to change that to step. It doesn't look as nice, but I think it's a little more realistic and matches reality if you think about it. Some of the rules that are associated with legal requirements and policy are probably associated with step because they're discontinuous, whereas some of the rules that are associated with continuous natural phenomena would more likely be use the linear or the cubic interpolation. Okay, this last thing to mention is that this grid here works kind of like Excel. So if you click tab, you're going to go right, shift tab takes you left, enter takes you down, shift enter takes you up. There we go. And you can also right click on the spreadsheet itself and have a few extra options like inserting rows or deleting rows in case you forgot a row data or you have a duplicate row. And that's it for this video. We talked about the seasonal variation. I can rename this to seasonal variation and OK. And that didn't rename. Okay, if I misspelled it, it works. Seasonal variation is there. And we also talked about the model variable, external variable, and state variables, and then some of the time series options associated with those different rule types, all related to the function of release rules here in ResSim.